Good morning, everyone. We continue this morning our series on the 10 marks of a healthy church. And it definitely was not planned this way, but it is appropriate that after so many of us yesterday spent a morning together labouring away in the garden or inside here on various cleaning up jobs, that this morning we come to speak about a church that practices loving service. Now, if I were asked to ask you to come up with maybe a famous face who we could maybe put in the dictionary alongside loving service, I wonder who you might think of. I think many of us would come up with this lady, of course, Mother Teresa, the Albanian Indian Catholic nun who established the Missionaries of Charity and lived and worked amongst the poorest of the poor in the slums of Calcutta. The religious order that she founded grew to operate in 133 countries. It cares for those dying from HIV/AIDS and from leprosy and from tuberculosis, as well as running soup kitchens, mobile clinics, orphanages, schools and dispensaries. On her death, the then Prime Minister of Pakistan called her lifelong devotion to care for the poor and the sick and the disadvantaged one of the highest examples of service to our humanity. Now, Mother Teresa might be the best known, but she is far from unique in her acts of selfless service. I wonder if you have heard of Damien Devusa. Before Mother Teresa, he volunteered to go and serve among the lepers on one of the tiny islands of Hawaii. Anyone who contracted leprosy on any of the other islands of Hawaii were all exiled at that time to this one single island. Essentially, they were there to live out their years and die. He volunteered to go and to care for their needs. He established leaders there amongst them in the community. He improved life for them. He taught them. He painted their houses. He organised farming and construction of roads and hospitals and chapels and churches. He dressed their ulcers. He served as their priest. He built homes for them. He shared food with them. He made their coffins. He buried their dead. He provided much needed medical and emotional support to that community. He lived among them. He ate with them. And all of this he did as their equal for 16 years until he himself contracted leprosy and died. What about Maximilian Kolbe? He was a Polish Franciscan friar, and he worked actively to hide Jews from the Nazis during the war. In 1942, this man volunteered to take the place of a complete stranger who was going to be starved to death along with 9 others in Auschwitz. At the end of 2 weeks, he was the last of them still remaining alive when the guards executed him with a lethal injection of carbolic acid. What a wonderful example of selfless service to humanity. But in case you were to get the wrong idea and think that these amazing acts of selfless love are only for nuns or priests or friars, what about Blaise Pascal? Most of you have probably heard of him. reached the highest heights in his own field of mathematics and science. What is not so well known about him is that he was also a devoted Christian, and his love for Christ drove him to serve the poor. He loved the poor, and he supported them with the proceeds of his inventions, but also by selling off his own personal possessions. He famously once declared, "I love poverty," because he, meaning Christ, also loved it. Now, he died only 39 years of age, and his funeral, like most people's funerals, was attended by family and friends, but also by his scientific and mathematical colleagues. But it is said that the back of the place where his funeral was held was filled with the poor, who had all turned out to honour him, because all of them had been helped by Pascal in one way or another throughout his lifetime. Now, acts of loving service can take on many forms. In the face of many legitimate threats to his life, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. pressed on, and he continued boldly proclaiming his powerful message of racial equality. Now, ultimately, what he did served to improve the lives of the generations that would follow. But he, of course, paid dearly for that with his own life. I'm not sure how many of you know this lady. She's an Australian lady, and her epiphany occurred when she was walking through an airport in Greece. And there she saw a number of handmade posters, and they had pictures on them of missing girls. And she was astounded that there could be so many missing children. And she did what most people wouldn't do. She actually paused to think about it and to investigate it. And she learned that these children were all victims of human trafficking. And as she dug deeper, she uncovered all sorts of accounts of girls being sold in auctions and of newborns being sold into pedophile rings. And she and her husband Nick could not turn a blind eye and walk away from it. And they founded A21, which is an organisation, now a global organisation against human trafficking. It operates now in 10 countries, and it does a very difficult and very dangerous world of reaching and recovering and restoring those who are trapped in modern day slavery. The organisation helps them to find their true identity in Christ and to stand on their own 2 feet, as well as doing the dangerous work of trying to prosecute those who have trafficked them. For this young lady, Katie Davis Majors, it was a short-term mission trip that she took after high school to Uganda that changed the trajectory of her life. Less than a year after she returned home, she was back there again, serving amongst the people in Uganda, and there she remained for the next 15 years. By the age of 23, she was the adoptive mother of 13 young girls. Now, pause to let that sink in, anyone who's ever had children. She was 23 years old, and she had 13 young children in her care. And we have some of her books in our library just across the way in that room over there. And when you read the accounts of just trying to bath and feed that many young children, let alone caring for the community around you, it's an amazing feat. But in the midst of it all, she founded a ministry which has grown and today is called Amazima, and it exists to make disciples of Jesus through authentic relationships, excellent education, which they provide to the children in the community, and strengthening communities. Now, each of these people have been publicly recognised for their loving service. But there are countless others who very quietly toil away with little to no recognition at all. Now, I'm sure that you will know some of them yourself. You can probably all think of people who give of their talents and of their time in loving Christian service. When I think about it, I think of a retired couple who have committed their lives to raising other people's babies. There they are down there. Foster care agencies count on these two and others like them because they know they will take the most difficult cases. Those little ones who are born with addictions and whose little cries would pierce anybody's soul. And these two hold them and they walk the house through the night and they soothe them and they offer them stability and routine and bucket loads of love. I think of those who prepare hampers and answer phones or organise transport and deliveries to those who are in need. I think of a pair of retired nurses who come here to this building every week, week in, week out, and who support local families in our playgroups, and they have a real heart for any who are struggling. I think of those who care for the aged and who befriend the lonely. That's them there with their big hearts. And they take them to appointments and they organise care for them and they spend time with them, talking to them. I think of those I know who have opened their homes, and I don't mean just for dinner. They have opened their homes and welcomed, on a short-term or a longer-term basis, those who are in need, who've fallen on hard times. I think of a man who for decades has faithfully served recovering alcoholics in this area by advocating for the needs of their group, by setting up for their meetings, by befriending and getting to know them, by opening and closing the building for them, and by doing whatever it takes, washing their dishes, cleaning up after them. That's him down there. I think of a young mum who gives hours and hours of her time each week organising our children's programs. There she is there. And she doesn't just ensure that the program itself runs smoothly, she follows up each of the families and genuinely cares for their needs. I think of men and women who labour faithfully in our kitchen. There they are there. There's quite a team of them because there's quite a lot of dirty dishes in this place. And whilst all of us are enjoying our lunches and having a good yabba together after church, they've gulped down a mouthful or two and have their heads down in a sink and their hands dirty on the dishes. I think of ladies who make dresses or teddies or any other sorts of things for children who are in need. I think of a man who gave the best of his retirement years to plan and oversee the redevelopment of this property. There he is there with his hammer. He's a funny man, that one. I think of the musicians and those that assist them, who give much of their weekend in rehearsals and then multiple services every week. I think of men and women who make time for leadership roles in their busy lives. Many of them are running businesses or working other full-time jobs, and they have young families, and that's them there with the multiple hats that they are wearing. I think of those who mow lawns or maybe snip stamps, those who intercede on a regular basis for others, those who visit the sick or fix broken things or mop dirty floors, those who arrange the flowers. There are people who stock our freezer with meals so that we have something to give to those who are in need. I think of those who teach English language to migrants. I think of those who quietly pull out weeds when no one is looking. And I think of those who send cards with no other purpose but to encourage those that they send them to. And if I thought some more, I could think of plenty of others, and I'm sure that you could too. But there is one thing that links all of these people and all of the other people that I've mentioned previously together. And it is that very same thing that drove Jesus to his knees before his disciples to wash their feet, and that is love. The very first verse from the passage that was read to us today in John 13, verse 1, states that when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. His motivation was love. The disciples had gathered to eat. Now, the custom of the day was that whoever was the host, it was their role to organise for someone to be on hand to wash the guests' feet. Because people were wearing open sandals back then, they were walking on dirty, dusty roads, and when they came into the house, you would wash their feet for them. Now, if it was a wealthy house, then this role would be given to one of the servants. But if not, then maybe a member of the family would take it on. But it seems that in this case, nothing had been organised. And that oversight is hardly surprising because other gospel accounts from this time indicate that the disciples were arguing about which one of them was the greatest. So imagine the scene. They've been arguing. Jesus has gotten up from the table. He's fastened a towel around his waist. After taking off his outer garments, he's prepared a basin of water. He returns to the table, and the penny starts to drop with the disciples. They realise what he's about to do. And they realise their oversight. And they are horrified. Because they know that this is the job of a lowly servant. And here is their Messiah kneeling before them with a basin of water. Now, if you're in need of a bit of creative assistance here, maybe look up the foot washing scene from the Chosen series. Not right now, because it's very distracting for people when you're on your phone, but when you go home, have a look, because I think they have captured in that clip the reactions of the disciples very well. All of them are reluctant to let Jesus anywhere near their feet. Judas has this horrible, awkward look on his face because he knows what he's already agreed with the chief priests to do in handing Jesus over to them. And Jesus knows what he's about to do too. And he knows what Peter will do as well in denying him. And knowing what he knows, he still kneels before them to wash their feet. Now, Peter expresses his horror. Oh, Jesus, you're not going to wash my feet. And Jesus reassures him that he would really only understand what was being done for him later on. Because like so much of what Jesus did and so much of what he said, this simple act of loving service would point ahead to a greater act of loving service that would come, that cleansing from sin that he did for us at the cross. And that's why when Peter continued to object, Jesus said to him, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." Now, Jesus didn't wash their feet, and he didn't go to the cross out of obligation. He laid down willingly his own life, and he submitted his own will to the Father's, and he did it in love as a servant, not because he was forced to, like a slave. And that is an important distinction for us as believers, because it doesn't matter whether you're serving a husband or a wife and children at home, or you're serving in a church or in some other organisation. If you are serving because you are being forced to, or because you're being made to feel guilty, or if there's coercion or manipulation, that is not loving service. None of us should have to be someone else's doormat. And if that is happening, then we need to think carefully about how to deal with or remove ourselves from that sort of a forced situation. We are to be servants, not slaves. A servant chooses to serve out of love. And there's a story that is told of an American tourist visiting India and observing how tenderly Mother Teresa tended to the wounds of a leper. He said to her, "Sister, I wouldn't do what you're doing for $10 million. And she is said to have looked at him and simply replied, "Neither would I, my friend." Because she had an entirely different motivation altogether. She was motivated to serve by love. And motivation matters. If we are serving purely to make ourselves feel better, maybe because we feel like we need to tick some sort of box of good works, or if we are serving to appease some sort of guilt that we feel, or if we're serving hoping that someone will notice or praise us, then that is not loving Christian service. That's striving for something else altogether. And that's the sort of thing that the Apostle Paul warned the church in Galatia about. If the primary motivation is to win the approval of or please people, Galatians 1:10, and I would add, even if that person is ourselves, then we are not a servant of Christ. But when we take seriously what Jesus described as the greatest commandments, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and to love your neighbour as yourself, the natural outworking of that kind of love will be loving acts of service, because what's on the inside will well up and overflow from us, and it will be seen in a tangible form. When he finished washing the disciples' feet, Jesus put on his outer garments again, and he said to them, "Do you understand what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do just as I have done to you." And the you there is plural. He's not speaking just to those people who have a special gift of serving. And some people do have a special gift of serving. It comes very naturally to them because it's a gift. But he's not just speaking to them, he's speaking to everyone. All of us are expected to serve because that is the example that Jesus set for us. It's not some of you will serve and for everyone else it's okay just to turn up. We're all expected to serve. Jesus served freely because he loved deeply. Now today, of course, people don't really need their feet washed. Well, most people don't anyway. We have shoes and socks that keep our feet clean and we walk on paved roads or pavements. It's not the act that matters. Jesus isn't saying everyone has to go around and take the other people's shoes and socks off and wash their feet. That's not the point. The point is that what he did was an act that was performed by a lowly servant. And here is Jesus, their teacher and Lord, doing it for them. While the disciples were striving, each one of them wanting to be the greatest, the Lord Jesus was stooping to wash their feet. And how different would our world be today if there was a little less striving and a whole lot more stooping? If there was a little less pride and a whole lot more humility? And if there was a little less of self and a whole lot more of others first? He concludes his teaching after washing their feet by saying, if you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. And that is the whole paradox of Christian service. Bless others by your service without expecting anything in return, and you will find yourself blessed. Now, even the secular literature points to the benefits of volunteering on our physical and mental well-being. Christian service has those same benefits, but it also grows our faith as we learn to depend on God, as we test out those gifts that he has given us, as we see him answer prayer and as we see his Spirit working in and through us. Greatness in God's kingdom comes through service. And as we close, I want to show you an image. It's an image that was influential during the time of the Reformation. Now, for those who don't know, the Reformation was a theological movement that occurred in the 16th century in Europe, and it challenged the then teachings of the Catholic Church, and it became the basis for the founding of the Protestant branches of Christianity. Luther was an instrumental figure at that time. But he had a friend who was an artist. You see, although the printing press had been around for about 100 years at least by then, very few people could actually read. And so pictures remained an important means of getting a message across. And in 1521, this artist friend of Luther's published a booklet of woodcut images. They were paired images right through the booklet. And the booklet was called Passional Christi und Antichristi. And I think you can probably figure out what that means. And it features a series of these paired images, and each image compares Jesus and the then Pope, Pope Leo. And one of the most famous of these images depicts that scene from our passage for today. Jesus is stooped down, washing feet. In fact, in the image, he's actually kissing one of the disciples' feet. And beneath that image, in the original publication, there was some text which was drawn from John 13. Second image in this pair features the Pope. He is seated high and raised on a platform. He's sitting comfortably under a canopy, and he's surrounded by all these important-looking people. They are bishops, they're monks, they're nobles, and they are princes. And all of them are lining up to kiss his feet. And the contrast is obvious, and the message was very clear, even to those who could not read the text that was under those images. Now, while that original image had an intended message that was very specific for the time of the Reformation, I think these images still have a lot to say to us today. We are all called to imitate Christ, but at times that is a battle. Because I think there is a part in each one of us that likes our comforts. There's a part in all of us that doesn't want to get our hands dirty. There's a part in all of us that prefers to be on the pedestal, that prefers to be the one being served rather than the one practicing loving service. And if we're honest, I think there is a part in all of us that looks a little bit more like that image on the right than it does the one on the left. And so we need to pray about this. We need to pray that God would help us to love, to truly love him with all our heart and all our soul and all our mind, and to love our neighbour. Because when we love deeply, as Jesus loved, then loving service will never be a burden for us. We will serve joyfully, because what we believe in our hearts will transform into what we do with our hands. And when that happens, our churches are not only healthier as a result, they will be irresistibly attractive to the outside world. Let's pray together. Father, what an example of loving service we have in our Lord Jesus Christ. May we love truly. May we love deeply like he did. And may that love well up in us, overflowing out of us in acts of loving service among us and extending out from us into the wider community. We thank you for Jesus and for this wonderful example that he has given to us. Amen.